Hello and welcome to Follow the Money. I am Su Jin Kim. Join us as we explore the tools and insights you need to jumpstart your financial journey. As global tensions rise and economic strategies shift, the Philippines finds itself at a crossroads between two giants, China and the United States. To unpack what this means for our economy, diplomacy, and sovereignty, we're joined today by Dr. Alan Chong, Senior Fellow at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore. Good afternoon, Dr. Chong, and welcome to Follow the Money.
Good afternoon.
Yes, Dr. Chong, for our first question, with the U.S. imposing tariffs as high as 145% on Chinese imports and significant duties on Southeast Asian countries, how do you foresee these measures affecting the Philippines' export economy?
Well, everybody in the Asia Pacific gets hit. Even Singapore, okay, we qualified for the so-called universal base rate of 10%. Everybody will get hit. It's a matter of degree, and I believe that your viewers and readers should also take into account that when you look at, okay, you have the statistics there on the screen. When you look at the percentages, the raw percentages coming out of the White House announcements, you should not take it literally. Why do I say that? Because trade is a strategy game. All right. If a particular export economy gets hit with certain tariffs, firms will recalculate, or if you prefer a more neutral term, recalibrate their export strategies to avoid the highest tariffs. All right. So there will be trade diversion. Again, trade diversion is not necessarily a bad term. It can mean that firms are creative, right, in countering the worst effects of tariff impositions. It can also mean that jobs may shift, all right, not necessarily in a bad way. And it can also mean that backup markets. Okay, if the United States had been, a particular Asian economy's number one trading partner, governments in the affected zone, as well as firms, could quickly recalibrate to export more to the next biggest importer of their products and the third biggest, and so on and so forth. So this is what I mean by trade diversion.
And then, Dr. Chong, I'm curious. The U.S. has recently frozen substantial portions of its international aid, including over $268 million earmarked for various programs. How might this aid freeze impact Southeast Asian nations, particularly the Philippines, in terms of development and diplomacy?
Yes, this has been a sledgehammer blow because the aid economy, if I can use that term, is usually off people's radars, all right? And I suspect that most of your viewers, listeners, readers on this channel will not have thought about how critical aid disbursements would be to holding up the Philippine economy, or any economy for that matter. The thing is, aid deals with what economists would call externalities, things that do not directly have an impact on production capacities, the ability of labor to be mobile, the ability of labor to be productive, all right? But they matter, especially if you look at things like aid that prop up health programs, public health programs, the vaccination, and I don't simply refer to COVID-19 vaccinations, to vaccinations for very ordinary day-to-day diseases like dengue, malaria. I mean, it's been with most developing parts of Asia for a very long time. All right, these tropical diseases can be combated or kept at bay, given the currency, or rather the frequency of adverse weather. We're in the tropical zone, most of ASEAN, and you expect these diseases to recur frequently. So US aid, for instance, along with other NGOs that do depend in part or in whole on US financing, frequently disperse these vaccines, medicines, in generally, to communities, whether they're considered poor or not. Medicine is always in short supply whenever these tropical diseases hit. And these things, if you don't think about it on a day-to-day basis, you take for granted because you assume that labor productivity means people showing up for work, and certain people of certain age categories can be nicely categorized or recategorized as parts of your active labor force. The thing is, usually you don't think about whether they've got adequate medical care to keep them as statistically productive as you imagine them to be. And the good thing, if you can read it as a silver lining, about Trump's cut off of aid to groups like USAID and other affiliated NGOs, is that the world is now waking up to the fact that you cannot sometimes quantify this external pillar of national, regional, global economies. Okay, the soft matters that keep people employable and productive.
And then, Dr. Allen, given the U.S.'s retreat in foreign aid, China appears poised to expand its influence through soft power initiatives. How should the Philippines navigate this shift to maintain its sovereignty and economic stability?
Okay, with China, I think one cannot always agree with everything that Beijing wishes or intends to do, such as the South China Sea claim. And I understand for your Philippine readers and viewers, it's extremely sensitive, all right? China has not been playing very nice over the claims on the South China Sea. It hasn't been very nice on overlapping fishing territories and so on and so forth. It has perhaps not deployed as much of its promised aid under the Belt and Road Initiative to the Philippines as one might expect. But by and large, if you think about it, China has not been an outright hostile partner of the Philippines. And I would wish that the Philippines would adopt the same policy as the rest of the ASEAN neighbors. Basically, you have to be able to compartmentalize the political, dissonance vis-a-vis China from the possible productive relations on the economic front. And that's how the rest of ASEAN has been going about it. You look at Vietnam, for instance. They had this on and off relationship with taking Chinese money. And despite that, all right, Chinese capital has helped build important infrastructure for Vietnam. Okay, I mentioned Vietnam because they've had a very rocky relationship with China since independence following the first Vietnam War. All right, despite the fact that both were governed by socialist/communist parties, they had a rocky relationship, and it goes back in history, right, to the time before they were, what we recognize as nation states. So, you have to disconnect the political disputes from productive economic relations. And you can go on and look at Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, where again, a lot of these ASEAN governments don't see eye to eye with Beijing. But that said, because China has been, thickly woven into interdependent economic relations with ASEAN, you have to accept that they are a legitimate partner in your economic growth, and you develop policies accordingly. Interestingly, you also have to acknowledge the fact that most of our information technology connected sectors, all right, across ASEAN are all linked to China's information technology sector. All right, your Huawei, your ByteDance, and I'm sure increasingly many of our economies are going to use DeepSeek as a kind of convenient and cheaper AI alternative to Western imports. We have to rely on China, and the best thing is to be pragmatic about it. And of course, I'm not suggesting that ASEAN decouples completely from the United States. It's just that the United States is undergoing a particular phase right now with the Trump presidency, Trump 2.0. And I would think that ASEAN governments could learn from having dealt with Trump 1.0, and we can reinstitute some of these policies.
And then, Dr. Allen, the Philippines and the U.S. have signed a military intelligence sharing deal to counter China's growing assertiveness. How does this agreement reshape the strategic dynamics in the South China Sea?
I would think that because of the historic path dependence between the United States and the Philippines, you've had a treaty alliance unlike anything the rest of ASEAN has, with the exception of Thailand. You can assume under normal circumstances that some degree of collaboration will go on, notwithstanding Trump's very arbitrary decision making. You have to understand it is in the nature of bureaucratic relationships, and the U.S. military, from the Pentagon right down to the regional commands, around the world, they are bureaucracies. Okay, so if they have established pathways, habits of cooperation, in this case with the Philippines, I don't think they're going to up and go anytime. All right, so I would think that the U.S.-Philippine military relationship writ large, okay, and we can put this enhanced intelligence sharing agreement in this lane, in this path, is going to carry on as usual. And unless Trump deliberately intervenes to stop it, I think it's business as usual.
And then, Dr. Allen, with ASEAN's varied responses to China's maritime activities, how can the Philippines lead or influence a more unified regional stance?
The Philippines will have to work quietly behind the scenes to get its ASEAN neighbors to come up with a unified stance on the tariffs. Again, this is of course easier said than done. ASEAN is one of those unusual regional organizations that sometimes does not work, very rapidly in the face of emergencies. But what it can do is to provide a ready-made consultative mechanism or forum in which you can take important measures like avoiding competitive currency devaluation, competitive, reallocation of supply chains, to everyone's detriment. So ASEAN can serve as this platform for talking about avoiding these worst case outcomes. I return to the first point I started with in this interview, that is that trade is a strategy game. So you have to use ASEAN in this regard in response to a question as a way of diminishing possibility that there will be competition amongst ASEAN economies in trying to save themselves at the expense of the others all the time. Because when you coordinate, and this is of course a classic game, those of us who study political economy label as prisoner's dilemma. We're prisoners of circumstance in so many ways, so this is very apt. The temptation is to defect, to go straight to Washington, cut a deal just for ourselves, and let the rest of ASEAN flounder. But you think about the alternative to that, to this kind of unilateralism. Because Trump can say, oh, okay, you are trying to cut a unilateral deal with me. I can also do the same, for your fellow ASEAN countries. And you're back to square one. So, this is the problem with prisoner's dilemma, the temptation to defect and, secure the maximum gain for oneself. It's always there. But if you let this so-called game of defection play out, you realize that everybody might just get the same deal from Trump. And, where does that leave you? It leaves you back to square one. All right, where you could have coordinated amongst yourselves and presented a common position to the Trump administration to say, all right, we address your concerns. If you suspect us of ripping off American companies, in the trade in electronic products, for instance, can't we address it across ASEAN, and so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you so much for your insights, Dr. Chong. We have to pause for a few reminders, but when we return, we'll explore the Philippines' role in balancing U.S. and Chinese influences. Stay on VNC and follow the money. We're back on Follow the Money. We are with Dr. Alan Chong, Senior Fellow of the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore. Now, Dr. Alan, considering the Philippines' significant trade ties with both the U.S. and China, what strategies can it employ to mitigate risks from escalating U.S.-China tensions?
Okay, as I said in the earlier section, ASEAN should be an important consultative platform to reach out for common strategy building with fellow ASEAN members. Because if you look at the Philippine, export profile, there is significant complementarity as well as competitive aspects vis-a-vis, say, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore. So, rather than a defect and try to make a unilateral, deal with the United States, it may be more helpful in the long run to coordinate with one's fellow ASEAN partners and then go to Washington and negotiate something that's more amenable and helpful to everybody concerned.
And then the recent tariffs have disrupted supply chains across Asia. How can the Philippines adapt its economic policies to remain resilient amid these disruptions?
Resilience, again, is a very loaded word. And I would think that the Philippine government, in consultation with the relevant business and industrial sectors, the labor unions, and so on, could think about creative ways to utilize trade diversion to its benefit. And you see, you have to consult, you have to talk, because as I've said, the nature of the prisoner's dilemma, and I have to keep emphasizing this, we are indeed prisoners of circumstance here, is that if you defect, you go unilateral, on paper it looks like you might gain the most. But you see, you're dealing with a large economy like the United States, which buys from literally the entire world. Now, if you do that, then it is to Washington's benefit. It could pick and divide the ASEAN economies against one another. Whereas if you try to come up with some kind of coordination within ASEAN, you stand a better chance of getting an optimal benefit for all of ASEAN. All right?
And then, Dr. Chong, in light of the U.S.'s shifting foreign policy, what opportunities and challenges arise in the Philippines in strengthening its regional partnerships?
This goes back to the ingenuity of your diplomacy. Again, one point I did not mention in response to your earlier question is that if you look at the complexity of supply chains, and I don't mean just your DHL, your UPS, your SF Express, the usual, logistics providers, but also the supply chains for producing computers, phones, computer peripherals, all these things require coordination. So you cannot go to Washington and say, all right, whatever you want, we'll give to you. We'll try to transfer all these operations, to the United States so that it will help Trump save American jobs and so on. You can't just do that because a supply chain is a complex operation. It has to do with something called the International Division of Labor. And you have to talk to the companies employing workers, for instance, as to how costs can be cut, you see. Because one response to Trump's tariffs is actually to reduce overheads at the location where your workers are employed. So that means getting workers to be more efficient, to perhaps work with more machines, with more AI. I'm using, of course, an extreme example. It can just mean cutting down on so-called less productive labor. Things that could that were normally done by 3 workers should be done by 1, and the other 2 workers from the original threesome can be redeployed to somewhere else in the supply chain with probably no reduction in salaries. It's just that you become leaner and more efficient.
And then, Dr. Allen, given the current global economic uncertainties, what sectors should the Philippines focus on to drive sustainable growth?
I would think that that your existing profile looks good because electronic components are number 1, followed by the spare parts to the more industrialized economies and so on. I think the profile looks good. It's just that for the moment, given Trump's tariffs, perhaps there should be more diversification towards servicing the Chinese economy, servicing ASEAN economies. Because the same computer parts that we currently sell in large measure to the United States can be resold. Okay, then that's the beauty about computer parts. They can be pivoted to, a secondary market or tertiary market, and so on. And of course, if you're thinking of the long term, okay, again, I suppose the long term can mean 5 to 10 years, which means that, these strategies may well outlast the current Trump administration. You go into things like green technologies. Green technologies are on the horizon. They're not widespread. The Philippines can easily go into things like greener air conditioning technologies. I've seen experimental cases, not just in Singapore, but elsewhere in the world, where people are willing to look at large-scale cooling of offices and factories using recycled water that runs through pipes, right, through several buildings to cool the entire interior of an entire block, whether it's a factory, a home, or an office. So, these are possible on the horizon industrial sectors that the Philippines can get into with very little heavy investment because the technology is out there and it's not extremely high tech. It's just a matter of being creative and so on. Technologies like the greening of offices in terms of reducing the accumulation of heat in offices with certain types of windows, glazing, things like that. Again, these things are not extremely high tech, but they can be easily transformed into a source of industrial advantage for the Philippines, for instance. On top of that, also, the Philippines can look at research into alternative fuels. All right. I read that it is extremely feasible for commercial aircraft, all right, both air freight aircraft as well as passenger aircraft to use palm oil, right, or some version of it. And the Philippines is a tropical country. I'm sure there are significant palm oil resources that can be researched upon, and you could become a major supplier of this so-called environmentally friendly fuels to the aviation industry. So there are all these things that are out there.
Finally, Dr. Chong, what long-term strategies should the Philippines adopt to navigate the complexities of US-China relations while safeguarding its national interests?
Again, this is a question that's facing every ASEAN country. I can only say you have to hedge, okay, between the two great powers. And Trump is teaching us a lesson that the United States, cannot be considered always reliable. We can depend on pre-existing paths of dependence. As I've said, you've got historic alliance with the United States, and that should count for something. And I would think that the Pentagon and its regional commands would have a vested interest in seeing that this US-Philippine relationship goes on from strength to strength. And with China, as I've said, hedging means that you learn how to delink, all right, your political disputes from productive and positive economic relations. And the Chinese, I think, are pragmatic enough to realize that this can go on. And you look at Xi Jinping's recent swing through Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Malaysia, for instance. It is deliberate to show that, notwithstanding the fact that Vietnam and China have got long-standing territorial disputes, to some extent you can say geopolitical disputes as well, they are willing to be pragmatic. They need Chinese money and they need the Chinese market.
As the global power play between China and the U.S. intensifies, the Philippines must chart a smart, sovereign path, balancing opportunity with caution, alliance with autonomy. Thank you, Dr. Alan Chong, for your insights.
Okay, you're most welcome.
Before we go, here's a thought from Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, Thomas Sowell. He said, the most basic question is not what is best, but who shall decide what is best. And that's it for today's edition of Follow the Money. I am Su Jin Kim. Thanks for watching. Keep it here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo News channel, always on top.